Oh, Andrew Callaghan, I want to do this. Oh, yeah. I was so excited to see that Andrew Callaghan, who is a real journalist, goes around the country, speaks with people with compassion and with interest, and I just couldn't recommend Channel 5 any more than I just did. He's amazing. And we had him on the Majority Report, and that was really fun. But like, people are really starting to recognize Andrew's got something good going on, and HBO got it. He has a show now. I saw it was produced by Tim Heidecker, A24, Jonah Hill, so some big names. Congrats to Andrew. And he went on CNN to promote his new HBOMax show. And there was this moment where Don Lemon and him had it wasn't a back and forth, but he said something that made Don Lemon very uncomfortable. Enjoy.
The movie's not just about like the Capitol riot and all that. It's also about like media echo chambers. You know what I mean? And like the dangers of the 24-hour news cycle, and how I think mainstream media like Fox and even CNN like competes for views by running constant 24-hour news cycles based upon fear, division, outrage, and panic, probably to like sell ads. So it's not just about the Capitol riot.
Yeah, I'm not exactly sure. First of all, I don't agree with what you're saying, but I'm not exactly sure of how that played into people going into the Capitol and rioting on January 6th. There's nothing fake about CNN.
Oh, I'm not saying like fake news. I'm just saying ramping people up and increasing division during that period of time.
I mean, Don was pissed. And like, you can see how it's really hard for them to see. Their programming is essentially very much Trump focused. And so
right. we should specify that it's not like they were, sending out, they were the ones perpetuating the whole election fraud conspiracy theories and stuff like that.
No, of course not.
But in essence,
he wasn't saying that either.
Right. But I think that's how Don Lemon seemed to have taken it when he interjected.
Right, but it doesn't compute though when he's trying to say what he's trying to say is that CNN does something separate, which is one that like they have no accountability at all about what they did in the lead up to the 2016 election, showing Trump's empty podium while Bernie Sanders was holding massive rallies. They gave him free press constantly, and then they'll when anyone deigns to criticize them on their platform, I don't agree with that. I mean, he was taken aback.
Also, like, frankly, like...
Sorry, Binder, I know I cut you off.
We know
No, I was going to say that same thing. And, their CNN, I think, president or CEO, Jeff Zucker at the time, he's not there anymore. He even came out and said that, Trump was great for ratings. That is the point here with what that CNN guest, what's his name again? Andrew
Callaghan. Yeah.
Andrew Callaghan was trying to make. I just don't think it connected to Don Lemon. He was just ready to defend CNN from the idea that they had anything to do with January 6th. I mean, as directly as Fox and the other right-wing channels that literally were saying, go to the Capitol building and help defend Trump's presidency. Yeah. No, of course not. But in essence of building up Trump and help fomenting this rabid fan base around him, they certainly played a part. Their very own president or CEO, whoever Jeff Zucker was there at the time, admitted such.
Like, CNN is essentially like they were the forerunners of like the ESPNizing of cable news, like where it's just screaming talking heads in boxes, like yelling at each other about the issues of the day with like a timer basically. And like
Tucker Carlson had a CNN show.
Tucker Carlson had a CNN show, Crossfire, with Paul Begala, where again, that's not news. That's a Democratic operative and a Republican operative screaming at each other. Like, see, there are many shows on CNN that are a lot of their panels are not really designed to actually inform the public. It's more like, hey, this is something that's going on in the world. Let's fight about it.
But I just have, I mean, it's larger than anything to do with Trump, as you say, Bradley, right? It is about the nature of their work, which is one that like chooses to make people feel like they're informed when they have something on in the background, but doesn't actually do anything to inform their audience. I mean, the headlines, yes. The
way they covered like a plane mysteriously disappearing somewhere.
Yeah.
Like all
Psychics.
that bullshit. It's all bullshit. That's how CNN and the like long term of their process is like when CNN came onto the scene. All these newspapers had massive foreign desks and foreign bureaus, and they were doing all this reporting, and the money moved away from that into TV, and CNN was like, oh, look at us, we're the global broadcaster, and they've been cutting back on all of that stuff the last decades or so. So it's like their impact on how we understand the world is negative.
And they became massive during the Gulf War, I believe, and they were instrumental in people sitting down for dinner, turning on CNN and watching big shiny bombs cascade onto villages and say, like, look at American might, and we're on the ground and reporting on this very seriously, not reporting on what the reality of the situation was there, which is that during the Gulf War, the United States decimated Iraq to such a degree that a disease spread in their water, killed many people. I don't have the number off the top of my head, but their entire infrastructure was completely depleted, all because it was a war based on geopolitical positioning, and it was the prelude to the disastrous war where we killed hundreds of thousands of people in Iraq. And because the American public did not have an understanding of that and were more interested in seeing red and blue team go boom, it greased the wheels for the Iraq war. And so that's the accountability that CNN needs to engage in, and it's embedded in the infrastructure of their network. That is the nature of the 24 news cycle, and how they have created it has allowed for the Hollywoodification of war crimes.
And when you see how this plays out with something like the sort of rail strike, which is like in the lead up to it, it's the workers, rail workers showing a little bit of democracy, saying, "Hey, we're going to strike for our what we demands here, including the sick day stuff." CNN was all like, "Is this too extreme? What about the economy?" And then, I mean, ultimately, after it was in hand and taken care of by Biden and Congress, then they started doing the special interests, like, oh, people, but they were playing the role that they wanted to. We have this old clip of. Oh, didn't it go into sound polls?
I think it didn't. The link didn't send. Yeah.
What I was saying too is like we'll get that because we wanted to play this that Matt's going to send me. Also consider the emphasis that they put on certain things. Like we'll watch this, I think, but we'll remember the compilation of videos we watched of people. I think Don Lemon was literally featured in the video twice of being like, is the rail strike worth it because of what it might do to the economy? You know, Christmas is right around the corner. What about all the gifts that little Timmy won't be able to get under his Christmas tree because the rail strikers want more than one goddamn day of paid sick leave? And then, meanwhile, commissioning an entertainment journalist to go sit down with Jeff Bezos and his new partner to be like, you know what? Before I cryogenically freeze myself and move to Mars while the planet experiences its heat death, I'm gonna give away most of my wealth. And then her response, her follow-up question being like, "Why are you so brave?
Yeah.
What makes you so valiant in your pursuit of unspeakable, ungodly amounts of money?" So it's just like beyond just the Trump stuff. It's also like the when you look at that stuff thematically, money is good. Labor impedes economic progress. Like labor strength impedes like all this stuff is all like this stuff just seeps into people, just like you said, just by having it be the soundtrack of their lives, let alone it just be anything about Trump or January 6th.
The one I specifically remember off the top of my head right now is like back in like 2021 and like the early 2021 when COVID was still in full swing. I mean, it still is. We're just choosing to pretend it isn't. But when COVID was in full swing and they were still getting the initial vaccinations out, they had on some a small business owner in New York City, some art gallery guy who went on to complain about how the COVID restrictions were hurting his business so much. And if you looked up this guy online, you would find out that he was like positioning himself for months and months at this point now as like one of like the leading like COVID denial guys, and they were just like on air positioning him as like just a small business owner, really worried about how everything is going, and it was just so disingenuous. And they had this guy on without anyone to put forward the opposite sort of, even if you weren't like wanted to have that discussion, which at that time I still think it's completely ridiculous. It was completely ridiculous. But even if you wanted to have that discussion, it was just presenting his, and so many outlets, but especially I feel like CNN did this. It was constant interviews with small business owners throughout 2021, pointing out how difficult it was for them they can't find any workers, they can't find people to hire during COVID. Well, yeah, there's a pandemic going on, but they were framing it as like the government was allowing all these people to live off these social safety nets that they provided during the pandemic, and how this was hurting businesses and people needed to get back out there and work and stop being so lazy. That to me was just like the most recent example of like just absolute mainstream media failing at covering something in the most obvious and disgusting way, honestly.
Do we want to play this?
Yeah, can we talk about it? Can we talk about a coverage failure by Don Lemon?
And this is not, again.
This is just funny. This is more just like a funny thing.
But this kind of crap is exactly why their like highfalutin opinion of what they do is grating to me. But here we go.
Now, stupid me.
A lot of people have been asking about that, about black holes and on and on and on and all of these conspiracy theories. Let's look at this. Noah says, what else can you think about? Black hole, Bermuda Triangle. And then Deji says, just like the movie Lost. I know it's preposterous, but is it preposterous, you think, Mary?
I mean, yeah, you don't need to listen to Stuart. That's so infuriating because that's entirely driven by profit.
I'm all for having fun. But I think, it's troubling. Yeah, we can talk about the possibility that a wormhole ate up a plane. That's fun. We can have fun. I don't want to not have fun. But I think, it's their opinion of themselves, and also how they get very, standoffish or self-righteous when you like imply a very, not imply, or even just like straight up say that, like, hey, the money and the source of funding for your channels or for your media outlet is going to inherently bias your reporting or color your reporting. They get I think it's very troubling that people in our media have a certain, posture that they take on critical thinking about the ways in which the context or like the funding or like the sources of information affect their, not just veracity, speaking of like fake news versus real news, but like just the way things are covered. Obviously people are going to have different opinions about events that are covered, but there's just posture being taken, not just by CNN, but by New York Times, by Washington Post, that they're above like being questioned about the objectivity of their reporting, and how even in the face of evidence that it seems to be towards a very specific ideological position. Sometimes that's pro-black hole, sometimes that's anti-union, anti-labor. They just want to be judged based on like very, very shallow, lazy comparisons to some of the worst actors in their particular industry. Like, we may be CNN and we're on 24-hour news cycle that's paid for by like weapons manufacturers or something, but like we're not as bad as Fox News. But, even in the sense that they aren't as bad as Fox News, are doing promoting people going out to January 6th rallies or at the White House or at the Capitol building, they are certainly contributing to an atmosphere where people sort of are uncritical about the source of information that they take in, and they just view things that they see on TV as being relatively true and not worth looking up. There's no like encouragement to like, hey, not that this is people's jobs, but like if you hear something that sounds wrong on CNN, maybe look it up. Maybe like go out, find some, verifiable sources, find some like, more like peer-reviewed sources and look up what other people are saying about it. They want to have people trapped in their own specific silo of information and then chastise people if they question where their information is coming from, how it's being sourced, how it's being processed, etc. And, when people fall into different silos, their issue with conspiracy theories, like obviously can't be, total because they bring on conspiracy theorists onto their website. I mean, in their channel to talk about planes disappearing into wormholes. Like, their issue with conspiracy theories and propagandas is that you should be, consuming only theirs. And it's not propaganda, it's objective news, but it's like, there's no such thing as like objective news. The news is inherently reductive even before you start filtering it through like commentary, because you have to decide what's worth reporting. And obviously someone is making an editorial decision at some point that something is worth reporting over other things, and whether it's ideologically, because we're a right wing or centrist leaning magazine, or it's because of financial reasons, like people like taking listicles, like those are decisions that are being made, and they have inherent effects on like the things that are covered and the way they're covered. And that's just not.
It's almost less of what you of how you cover something. It is more also what you cover, and I feel that is like they entirely miss that point, because they're like, they have blinders on or have cognitive dissonance about the profit motive motivating it, which is like, it's not that the plane was the most important thing for us to learn about constantly. And the whole Stewart segment has like, he goes into depth about how much they were really covering this plane. It's because that is a profit motive. So that's like most of it.
Because it's simple. Like that doesn't require any actual, you just get these people to zoom in basically and speculate bullshit. There's no actual like work being done besides just like, oh yeah, black holes. I mean, wow.
Yeah, but the 24 hour,
imagine that.
The 24-hour news cycle also like implies a lot of things to the people who are like only vaguely engaged with it. It implies that 24 hours is enough time or sufficient time to cover all the news in the world that's worth covering, even if most of the shows are going to be covering the same thing, or like, some of them are going to be like light view-esque talk shows like Fox and Friends, where they cover the same thing from a different, more casual angle. And also that like, you're going to go into enough depth to, like, if you have 24 hours to actually get at all of the angles. And neither of those are happening. But what it does do is, like, when things fall out of the 24-hour news cycle, people think that the solution has happened. A lot of people just assume when something stops being covered, and therefore people, stop watching it because it's stopped being covered, that the problem has just been solved. And a lot of problems just never get solved, and people just feel like they've been solved because one day, you just stop hearing about a mass shooting in the news. And so you assume that, like, everything was taken care of in that town, and then, like, every so often they'll pop up like, 10 years later, Parkland's still dealing with the trauma of a mass shooting. Sandy Hook's still doing the trauma. And so it just, we just live we live in a world, I think, where like the 24-hour news cycle just gives a false sense of resolution to a lot of our structural problems that are just every so often just take everyone by surprise.
I will say that to their credit, when you talk about, deep coverage, I would say the black hole scenario for that missing plane was certainly a very deep. They went deep for that one. I mean, but that's the thing. Like, if you have no news for a story, if you have nothing new to report on for a story, like, clearly that was a big story, that missing plane at the time, and clearly that was a ratings. They saw that it brought ratings, but the plane was missing. Nobody found anything. There was no additional information out there. Clearly, they made a decision to do this off-the-walls, bizarre, offbeat, conspiratorial coverage because they had nothing new to report on about it that was legitimate. So they just came up with something new from a pure ratings and monetization standpoint. I mean, that's why they did that. There's also, we talk about like coverage and how they don't get too in depth with things. There's also, in this scenario, in our example scenario, this was a case where they covered every angle we knew about, and then they just had to go bizarre with the angles they covered it on because it was a ratings driver that they had nothing new to report on about.